This episode explains that commission became powerful because it connects selling to reward. But as selling becomes more complex, that promise needs clearer design, stronger documentation, and shared understanding. Commission has survived for so long because it carries an idea that feels simple and fair. When someone helps the business win revenue, the business shares part of that success with them. That is why commission remains one of the most powerful ideas in sales compensation. It gives the salesperson a reason to keep going, and it gives the company a way to connect reward to commercial results. But the same idea that makes commission powerful also makes it risky. In effect, if you create a certain result, the company will pay you in a certain way. The difficulty is that both sides must understand that result and that reward in the same way. What exactly counts as the sale? What value is being rewarded? And when is the commission earned? When is it paid? What happens if the customer cancels or the deal is discounted? Or the contract changes and the seller leaves or the territory moves? These may sound like technical questions, but they are not only technical, they are the places where trust either holds or breaks. Because when a salesperson reads a commission plan, they are not only reading a formula, they are reading a promise. Welcome to Sales Comp Decoded, the stories behind how companies pay people to sell. I am Abimbola, and today we are talking about the promise hidden inside every commission plan. In the last episode, we look at what your sales plan says behind your back. We talked about how a compensation plan communicates what the company truly values, even when leaders does not realize it. Today, we're staying close to that idea, but shifting the lens. A compensation plan does not only communicate values, it creates expectations. And once expectations are created, they become sensitive. A seller may not use the word promise, but that is often how the plan is experienced. If the plan says commission is paid when a deal is closed, the seller builds an expectation around that sentence. If the plan says the seller can earn a certain amount at target, they build an expectation around that amount. And if the plan says overperformance will be rewarded, they build an expectation around what happens when they exceed target. So when the plan is unclear, the problem is not only confusion, the problem is that different people begin to believe different promises. That is where many compensation disputes begin. It may not be because someone is acting in bad faith or because the company is trying to avoid payments or because the seller is trying to take advantage. Very often, the issue is simpler and more uncomfortable than that. Two people thought they understood the same sentence until the moment money was involved. Imagine a company with a quarterly commission plan. The plan says commission is paid on deals closed within the quarter. That sounds clear enough. Now imagine a seller works on a significant deal throughout the quarter. The customer gives further confirmation before the quarter ends. The opportunity is updated in the customer relationship system on the final day of the quarter. The contract is signed by one side before the deadline, but the customer's final signature comes 3 days later. Finance raises the invoice in the next quarter and payment arrives several weeks after. So, which quarter does that deal belong to? From the seller's point of view, The deal was done before the quarter closed. But from finance point of view, the deal may not be complete until the signed contract and invoice are in place. But from sales leadership point of view, the opportunity may look closed because the customer agreed. While from the human resources point of view, the question becomes what the plan document actually says. And if the plan does not answer that clearly, the company now has a promise with a gap in it. That gap may look small on paper, but inside the business, it can become much bigger. It can become a payout dispute, a manager credibility problem, or a fairness issue if a similar case was treated differently before. And beneath the specific question about timing, there is a deeper question the seller may be asking. Does this company keep its word when the answer is inconvenient? This is why commission design needs more care than many people give it. A base salary is usually easier to understand. You have a role, you do the work, and you are paid an agreed amount. Of course, salary has its own complexities, but the basic relationship is fairly straightforward. Commission-based pay is different because it depends on conditions. It says that when a defined result happened, then a defined payment follows. That structure gives commission its motivational power, but it also creates risk. If the condition is not clear, the promise is not clear. And when the promise is not clear, people will interpret it differently. This is where modern selling makes the old commission idea harder to manage. In an earlier version of selling, the connection often felt direct. One salesperson found the customer, sold the product, closed the deal, and received commission. The logic was simple enough for everyone to understand. But many businesses no longer sell that way. A deal may involve someone who creates the first meeting, a salesperson who leads the opportunity, a technical specialist who answers product questions, a manager who helps with negotiation, a customer success person who protects the relationship, and a finance or legal team that help close the final terms. The customer may not buy in one clean moment either. They may test the products, request a pilot, negotiate a discount, sign a phased agreement, expand later, renew later, or cancel early. So when the plan says you earn commission on what you close, the sentence may feel simple, but the business reality underneath it is no longer simple. That is why commission is not just a percentage. It is a designed promise. It must define what performance means, what value the company wants to reward, and when the promise has truly been earned. This is where many companies are careful in one area and less careful in another. They are often careful with the financial side. They model the cost, look at the budget, test what happens if more people exceed targets, check whether the company can afford the payouts. But they may give less attention to the meaning side. Will everyone who reads the plan understand the promise in the same way? Will sales, finance, human resources, legal, or manager interpret the same rule consistently? Will the plan still be clear when the case is no longer simple? Because a compensation plan is usually tested by the uncomfortable cases more than the easy ones. The true strength of the promise appears when a deal lands on the boundary between two quarters, when a customer cancels after a commission has already been paid, when two sellers contributed to the same deal, when a seller leaves before the payout date, when a territory changes mid-cycle, or when an exception was granted last year and somehow now expects the same treatment again. Those are the moments when the plan reveals whether it is clear promise or only a loosely worded intention. And this matters because sellers take this promise seriously. They have to. Salespeople are constantly evaluating opportunities. They compare efforts, likelihood, timing, value, and reward. They look at a deal and decide whether it is worth pursuing now or whether it is worth pushing harder, whether it is worth negotiating differently, and whether it will help them reach their earnings goal. If the plan is clear, it supports those decisions. But if the plan is unclear, the seller begins to guess. And guessing is dangerous in sales conversation because it creates expectation without alignments. One of the most common places where the promise becomes unclear is the definition of revenue. A company may say commission is paid on revenue, but the word revenue can mean different things to different teams. Sales may think of the value booked in the customer relationship system. Finance may think of revenue after discounts, adjustments, and recognition rules. Leadership may think of annual contract value, while the seller may think of the full value of a multi-year contract. That difference is not a small technical detail. It can change the payout. And when the payout changes, the interpretation becomes emotional. The seller may feel the company moved the goalposts, while the company may feel it is simply applying the rule correctly. The issue is that the rule was not clear enough to carry the promise. Timing creates the same problem. A company needs to decide whether commission is earned when the customer signs, when both sides sign, or when the invoice is raised, or when payment is received, or when finance recognizes the revenue. Different companies may choose different answers, and some choices will make more sense than others, depending on the business model, but the plan needs to choose clearly. If it does not, the decision will eventually be made under pressure, and the decision made under pressure rarely feel neutral to the person affected. The promise can also break when things go wrong. A customer may cancel, a contract may be reduced, a deal may be restructured, a product may not be implemented as expected, or a seller may leave before the payment date. In those situations, the company has to decide whether commissions still stand, whether part of it is recovered, and whether it is delayed or whether it is adjusted. These are not pleasant questions, but they are necessary questions. If the plan is silent, people will fill the silence with their own expectations. And when the business itself changes, the promise becomes even more fragile. Roles evolve, territories move, accounts are reassigned, products change, and companies acquire other companies. A seller may start the year under one set of conditions and find themselves operating under another set by mid-year. If the compensation plan does not explain how the promise behaves when the business changes, sales, finance, and human resources may all interpret the situation differently at exactly the moment when alignment matters most. That is how disputes grow. The disputes may appear to be about one payout, but it is often about something deeper. It is about whether the company and the seller understood the same agreements. It is about whether the plan was clear enough. It is about whether similar situations are treated consistently. It is about whether the company can explain its decision without sounding like it's inventing the rule after the fact. This is why I like to say that compensation is never just payment. It is a business promise. And like any promise, its quality depends on how clearly it's made, how consistently it is applied, and how honestly it is explained when circumstances becomes difficult. That does not mean a plan document should become impossible to read. Nobody benefits from a plan that is so legalistic that seller cannot understand it. The goal is not to turn every compensation plan into a dense contract. The goal is to make the promise clear enough that the people affected by it can understand the logic in the same way. That means the plan should explain the areas where confusion usually appears. It should make clear how due credited is assigned when more than one person contributes, when a payout is triggered and what might delay it, how new hires or people on extended leave are treated, what happens if a customer cancels, how exceptions and disputes are handled, how plan changes are communicated, and what happens when someone leaves before a payout is made. Those areas do not need to be buried in complicated language. They need to be written plainly because they are the areas where trust is most likely to be tested. Many plans cover some of these, but leave important gaps. And the gaps are where disputes live. A plan may explain the rates, the quota, the target very clearly, while saying very little about due splits, late customer payments, rule changes, or exceptions that were made before. That kind of plan may work during ordinary months, but it becomes weak during difficult moments. And sales compensation is full of difficult moments. And that is why practitioners should not only ask whether the plan is mathematically correct, they should ask whether the promise is easy to understand. A good plan should allow the seller to understand what kind of performance leads to reward, the manager to explain the rule without chasing several people, finance to apply the rule consistently, human resources to defend the process as fair, and leadership to explain why the plan pays the way it pays. If that is not possible, the issue may not be the commission rates. It may be the promise around the commission rates. This is where the perspective from the previous episode becomes useful. Your plan is always speaking, but in a commission plan, it is also promising. It is saying, if you create this kind of value, we will reward you in this way. So, the company needs to be very careful about what this kind of value means. It needs to decide whether the plan is rewarding any revenue or only LD revenue, whether the first contract matters more than the long-term customer relationship, whether the work is owned by one person or shared across several contributors, and whether the company wants to reward booking the deal, collecting the cash, or creating value the customer keeps paying for. The answer does not have to be the same for every company, but it does have to be clear. Because when the promise is unclear, people may still work hard, but they may work from a different assumptions. And when those assumptions meet the payout file, the conversations becomes much harder. This is also why changing a commission plan can feel so sensitive. Leaders may think they are changing the formula. Sellers may feel the company is changing the deal. And in a way, they may be right. The commission plan is part of the psychological agreement between the company and the seller. It shapes what the seller believes effort will lead to. It shapes what they believe the company values. It shapes how they judge whether the company is being fair. So when a company changes the plan, it should not only explain the mechanics, it should explain the new promise. If the old plan rewarded pure revenue and the new plan rewards profitable growth, say that plainly. If the old plan paid mainly on the first sale and the new plan includes more focus on existing customers, explain why the business has changed. If the old plan rewarded individual ownership and the new plan recognizes shared contribution, explain how selling now works and why the old model no longer fits. People may not love every change, but they are more likely to respect the logic when they can understand the promise behind it. That is what good conversation communication does. It does not simply announce numbers. It explains the agreements. It helps the seller understand what the company is asking for, what the company will reward, and why the design has changed. This is where commission can become powerful again. Because the issue is not that commission is old-fashioned or wrong. Commission still works when the connection between behavior, value, and reward is clear. It can create energy. It can focus efforts. It can attract strong sellers. It can make success feel shared between the company and the people who help create it. But when the business has become more complex, commission needs more thoughtful design. The familiar idea that stronger sales performance should lead to stronger reward may still be useful, but it needs to be supported by clarity. The company must define what selling means, what kind of revenue counts, how shared work is recognized, when payment is earned, and what happens when the conditions change. Without that clarity, the promise becomes too easy to misunderstand. So here is the signal for this episode. Take one commission plan and complete this sentence. The plan promises that if a seller does this, the company will pay that. Do not start with the formula, start with the promise. If the sentence is easy to complete, you are already closer to understanding the plan. But if the sentence becomes too long, confusing, or full of exceptions, then the plan may be carrying more ambiguity than you think. Ask whether sales, finance, human resources, the manager, and the seller will complete that sentence in the same way. If the answer is yes, you have a strong promise. But if the answer is no, that is where the work begins. Because every commission plan makes a promise. The question is whether the company and the seller understand that promise in the same way. In the next episode, we will stay in the foundation but shift the lens again. We will look at what happens when the sales role evolves, when the job quietly becomes different from what it was when the plan was written, and why confusion appears when the pay does not follow the change. I am Abimbola, and this is Sales Comp Decoded, the stories behind how companies pay people to sell. If this episode made you think differently about commission, share it with someone who still sees commission as just a percentage. Because commission is never only a calculation, it is a promise. and promises needs to be clear before trust is tested.